Today we're going to talk about high performance. And when I say high performance, I mean really high performance. Today's guest, Dr. Kirsten Peterson, has worked for the last several decades with Olympic athletes. And you know, the difference between winning and losing in the Olympics can be minuscule, a fraction of a second, a single point or two. So you'd think that people who are interested in high performance at that level would be talking about the tiniest little tweaks, the most advanced strategies. But instead, we're going to talk about the basics, the fundamentals, like mindfulness, like decoupling outcomes from effort, like meditation, like psychological safety. And so it turns out that most of high performance, whether it's in the sports arena or as we talk about bringing it to life in our everyday lives, in terms of being the best we can be, really comes down mostly to doing the basics right. So I'm really thrilled for this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, Dr. Kirsten Peterson, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
A pleasure to be here, Howie. Thanks for inviting me.
I want to get a lot personally out of this conversation because it's a topic that's cool and dear to my heart. And it is kind of high performance. And there's a lot of buzz about high performance and a lot of theory. But one of the places that I love to look for high performance is in the world of athletics, where it's kind of overt and obvious and very hard to fake or fudge. And that's, I think, one of the places where you derive inspiration and where you've gotten a lot of experience. So could you introduce yourself kind of on that basis? Like what are you bringing to us today?
Sure. I laugh when you kind of go front and center with the words high performance, because I think there are plenty of places that in both our lives where we see people or places or organizations thinking that they're high performance. And it's just become such an overused mantra. You know, we're high performance. And a lot of times what I see in people who are trying to do this or think they're doing it is that they're always skating toward the latest thing or the newest technology. And what does that mean? There's got to be something new and exciting to as a hack to get there, when really, it's like going into a basketball game and thinking it's all about the alley-oop dunk, but you don't know how to dribble. There's so many basics that underpin the performance that we can get right before we have to worry about chasing the latest thing. So I just, high performance always sounds like some new thing. And in fact, it's really doing a lot of times the basics right. But having said that, I came to this conclusion from a career spent in Olympic sport, so that side of the elite sector, so not professional sport, in one of the probably poorest career choice moves ever in retrospect. I went directly from kind of a newbie counseling psychologist to a senior sports psychologist role with the Olympic Committee in the U.S., which led to a severe bout of imposter syndrome for more than a few years, actually, because you go from like zero to hero, and you're working with elite athletes. It was more my concern was around the perception of the sports psychologists or the professionals around me. Do I really have the chops to do this thing? Looking back, I think I did, but at the time it was hard, and I, had there been a few more steps, that would have been good for me.
So you were more concerned about the opinion of your peers than the people you were working with?
It's so funny. I've never said that out loud before. But when you're working with athletes, they're people first, and they may have some super talents that make them gifted in some ways, but no one is the complete, very few and even elite athletes are the complete package. And you just kind of go and work with what needs help. If they open to you and you work with them, those relationships are built on trust. And I didn't have that problem, but it was more, I think, just this idea of, who was I to walk into a national conference as a senior sports psychologist when a month ago I'm making $18,000 as a graduate student? And who would believe me? Who would think I had the gravitas to do that? And so it was interesting. Like, athletes never ask about your pedigree, but fellow
Uh-huh.
professionals, where'd you go to grad school? What'd you do? Kind of thing. So yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it, but it was more my fear of being found out as the imposter by either my peers at the USOC or others in the field, I think.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to keep derailing this, but I find this
No.
fascinating, especially from someone who I'm imagining is introspective about performance. If you could take the magic pill that would make you not care about the approval of your peers,
Mhm.
would this have been the right move? Or do you feel like there's imposter syndrome and then there's actually not being up to the job? Like,
Yeah, and I don't. I feel like it's a job for. What was fun about working for the USOC, and I think it still is that everybody was super passionate. Nobody was phoning it in because people cared about the Olympic movement, and so working with people, no matter what their role was, all willing to give everything they had for the movement. I don't know if it still is that way because I think sport has kind of evolved since I was there in that role anyway. I was
and
there
what
for
are we talking
14.
about?
That was 96 to 2011.
Okay.
And then 2010, actually, I quit cold turkey from the USOC job because at that point, after 14 years, I realized I was phoning it in. I'd lost something part of it was that my kid was 10 and I had not seen a birthday of hers. More often than not, I missed them because I was traveling a lot with winter sports. She was a February baby. And here I am in Australia, there's the Summer Olympics and then that other thing that happens in the winter that maybe is an Olympics in the US where you and I are both from. Winter Olympics is a big deal. I felt like I was missing out so I quit cold turkey. Didn't really have anything. So enjoyed the better part of, I don't know, 6 months with being a full-time mom. We got a puppy and, I'm starting to try to figure out next steps when the Australian Institute of Sport heard I was unemployed. It's a small world in sports psych and recruited me hard to come work and lead their team. And it seemed like such a kind of cool idea, like, oh, let's move to Australia. How hard can that be? Well, I mean, you've just relocated internationally, it's harder than it looks. And the reason they were recruiting me, as it turns out in retrospect, is that they couldn't hire anybody domestically to manage what was, as soon found out, was kind of a dysfunctional team of psychologists. Great practitioner.
Is that not an oxymoron
I
or just
know.
a delicious irony?
Well, let me say that I lost count of the times people came up to me and told me how ironic they found it that psychologists couldn't get along with each other. And I'm new. I'm in months in this job. I don't know the difference between I really found it at first hard to discern. Is it around how Australians work? Is it something I'm doing? This was so foreign to me. So I just finally it's not funny because I have to figure out what I'm going to do here. Note to job seekers, if you ever go to interview for a role and you don't meet the people you're going to be working with, that's probably a sign that something's up. And I didn't even know to question it. And with all due respect to the practitioners in the roles at the time, it wasn't that they weren't good at what they did, but it was a matter of working together collaboratively. Like people, I find that in high performance domains, it's often the inexorable search for the most talented person, the person with the highest profile. Yet I'm here working with a team. We're supposed to be collaborating together.
Hmm.
And I really had to push hard on this mantra about, it's all about profile and being. When I started to hire, I actually did some personality testing on each person coming in to ascertain whether they would work well in a team environment. And when I brought keynote speakers in for our national conferences, I always asked them to be ready to talk about their biggest mistake, not just their biggest, um, how great they were. Like we'd
Hmm.
fill ourselves up with the Kool-Aid of being good and different, but especially in a collegial setting, I really wanted to open us all up to this idea. We don't all know everything, and we can, being together, we can make ourselves better. It just didn't feel like that was part of the AIS culture at the time, which for the
Yeah.
first year made it exceedingly challenging for me as this new person. Couldn't really figure out what was going on at first, and led eventually to what I might call, in layman's terms, of nervous breakdown about 8 months in. Stopped sleeping, which is not very high performance at all, uh, and learned a lot about how you can convince yourself you're still sane with no sleep.
Mm.
And it really came down to a come to Jesus moment with sitting down with my boss, getting sent home for a couple of days to just rest and get some sleeping meds, get some antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication, get a good executive coach to really help me over the hump. And it ended up, I had to divest through either people quitting or not renewing contracts about a third of the team, and then hire, they say you come in, it's your team when you've hired the people you really want. It was a great learning experience to realize that's actually true. And then a year in, things kind of flipped, and it was
Mm.
great. And then AIS reorganized and set me free, because they divested themselves of a lot of their sports science program in 2018,
So
which was
there's a lot. There's a lot just to unpack in that about performance.
mm,
I'm very drawn to what seems like a bit of dynamic tension between individual high performance and team, but I
yeah,
think I want to wait. I want to wait on that. I want to make a note and come back to it after we've
sure.
talked about. I think maybe talking about individual high performance
Mm,
first.
yeah.
And so I'm curious, like when you first took that job and you're green and you've got all this imposter syndrome, like what did you know that turned out to be true and useful? And what did you learn from working with these elite athletes that maybe contradicted or added to what you had learned in school?
Well, hmm. I might need you to rephrase that. I think what I learned, not that wasn't true. I learned over time my strengths and weaknesses as a provider. I had a great boss who was forever supportive of me, um, which really helped. I think I had a series of really good supervisors that knew how to bring out things I didn't see in myself, and so I think there's something about high performance having somebody who sees potential in you
Mm,
and that is able to do that. So great coaches do that really well. But it isn't about being brilliant with athletes, but it is about being there. One of the things that I learned about being in really high performance, especially at like something like the Olympics, is that it there's only one winner, right? And yet so many people around me would talk about their career in terms of the people who won that they worked with.
hmm.
And I think it's, like I can count on my own hand less than this many, and I'm holding up five fingers, gold medalists I worked with. And this is over a 20 plus year career period, which was a real source of shame for me for quite a number of years after I left sport. People would say, oh, you must have worked with really famous athletes. And being a psychologist, I'd be like, oh, can't really say, it's confidential, but let people believe what they would about how successful the athletes I worked
Mm,
with were. But it's way more meaningful and important work when you're with someone who isn't quite on their game or has the really disappointing loss, helping them come to terms with the really difficult side of sport. Winning is easy in that sense. Not to say that it's not, I'm not talking about the effort and the strategy and all the years of stuff you have to do to get there, but the act of winning is the easiest thing an athlete can do. Now, coping
hmm,
with the aftermath of winning is a whole other story, because often there's a boatload of expectations. And what does it mean the day after I've won the Olympic gold medal? But it's the athlete who comes in fourth. They don't make the podium, or the
hmm,
athlete who is expected to win who doesn't. As a sports psychologist, that's where I feel like you help people redefine who they are when the outcome they expected didn't happen. And how do I make peace with that? How do I grow from this experience and not let it break me, especially the favorite who didn't win?
Mm.
Does
That's
that, I don't know if
so
I'm
interesting.
answering your question, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's so interesting to me because when I think of what a sports psychologist would do, it would be to help you in the moment of the challenge to
Mhm.
do better than you would have done otherwise, right? So teaching someone to deal with the pressure, teaching someone to stay focused, to keep their eye on the ball, to monitor their breathing, all that stuff. And what you're talking
Sure.
about is like what what happens after the disappointing performance as sort of equally or maybe even more important to their life trajectory.
Only it's interesting because I've made this mistake trying to translate like the psychology of sport to other domains like medicine or defense, for example, in that sport is a zero sum game. There's only one winner in any given competition, right? So there's a lot more chance that you're not, so people will talk not necessarily about going into the Olympics to win the gold medal, but to do their very best or, come get a finish that's higher than before. But when I translate that over to medicine, I got spanked because, doctors are like, we have to win every operation. Losing one patient is unacceptable. So it's like everything has to be a win. It's not about, the loser and somebody else wins. And you know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
translating what the psychology of success is very domain specific. Military, it's even different from that.
yeah.
Um, you know, that's kind of
Yeah.
counterintuitive to sport.
Ah,
But
that's
having
real.
said all, so let me just step back because what you were saying about what sports psychology or performance psychology in the broader sense is helping people develop the tools to meet those moments. But we're humans, and despite our best efforts, there are moments that can upend us for any number of reasons. Weather, officiating, not quite there. There's all sorts of things that happen. The ball bounces the wrong way. So we have to be ready to rebound from all those things. And I think yeah. So that's why helping through the biggest rebounds is some of the most important work we can do. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Mm,
interrupt your train of thought.
yeah. No, I have many trains and they're, decoupling and
they're,
recoupling all the time.
they're all leaving the station in opposite
Yeah.
directions.
There's a train strike in Barcelona. It's all over the place. I mean, what I was thinking is like, I've done a lot of work in the health field, and one of the things that I see as problematic is the medical view of failure, right? Which is we have to win every time, which kind of feels like a kind of high pressure thing that would actually get in the way. That,
Yeah.
there's a bigger picture to the arc of a career or to the act of healing and service than winning. And I see that too. I've never played sports at any level where, there was anything real at stake in terms of, money or access to higher education or anything. But I've played as if there was. As a kid,
Yeah.
I had a terrible temper. Throw my racket, cry, um,
Mm, yeah.
and I see
Sports
that today.
psychologist dream.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm curious how you work with athletes where okay, your job is to help them do the best they can, maybe get podium, maybe get a medal, but there's this bigger picture that you see. How do you help them align with that? Because, almost everybody's going to lose.
It A big part of our job is decoupling the outcome, which is not in your control with the process. This is kind of sports psych 101. But you have, if you sit in front of a room of elite athletes and you say, do you control outcome? Lots of them will say, of course, my performance dictates how I will do. And then I'll just kind of push back and say, well, there's, X number of opponents on the field with you or in the same competition who have trained just as much and have, are going to kind of stir the pot in ways you can't anticipate. Argue that you don't control outcome. You only control. So I talk about my job as a probability enhancer. That what we want to
Uh,
be able to do is bring what you have, like you say, on to the line on a given day and free you up to perform to the potential you have. And that's all we can do. And at the end of the day, we let the outcome take care of itself. But it is so often that the stories I can, exactly the same thing for a doctor in the operating theater who thinks he or she has to successfully perform every operation, or the athlete who thinks they quote unquote has to win. That's a story that they're telling themselves. And so I talk a lot about this idea of our minds tell us stories, or we get ideas in our head that have nothing to do with reality, but yet are really ineffective performance enhancers because they create the kind of pressure that we see upending people. You look at any tennis major, and often the first time a player makes it to a final, their odds of winning are really low because they've never been in that situation before, and the stories they tell and what they see, and it's so different, and they make it into a something bigger than what's right there at hand, which is to serve and volley and get the ball over the net and be agile and move around and do the things you do as a tennis player. But we just get caught up in our stories, and it's often what we're trying to do is uncouple or depower the stories that aren't useful.
So one thing I'm thinking of is I have a client who plays sports. It's not his job, but it's for fun. And he was in a league, and his team was in the finals. And then this league, they had the final game at prime time, and then later was the third and fourth place teams were playing. He said he was really nervous and didn't play well in the finals. Afterwards, the third and fourth place team, one of them didn't have enough players, and they asked him to pick up, and he played brilliantly.
And what does that tell you about the power of the mind right there?
It's I mean, the story, I mean, whether it was, like pretend, like it's a glitch, right?
The outcome when I'm playing for somebody else's team doesn't really matter to me. So I can just get out there and play. And that's a great, sort of a little social experiment that this athlete demonstrated, the power of what our mind does to us, and how when we are, and it's not, obviously in the real world, you can't just say, okay, the way I'm going to cope with my performance anxiety is to go play for outcomes I don't give a crap about.
Shit is a fine word on this podcast.
Okay. But it is always coming back, like what my brilliant boss at the USOC, Dr. Sean McCann, would talk about what your job in any given moment on the field of play is. And so, first knee-jerk response from an athlete is, well, to win. No, let's talk about if that's out of your control, your job is the stuff that's totally in your control in this moment. If you're a wrestler, your job is to get frickin' first, good positioning on the mat. So if you're not bending your knees and really in a crouch ready for whatever's coming at you, you're dead in the water. So do you know how to do that? And checking and giving athletes confidence that, if I really drill down to what the elements of my job are, I know how to do those things. It's often with the stuff we get caught up as the stuff that we can't, which our minds play lots of games about trying to protect us. So what they do is they cast out there in times of uncertainty. And there's no bigger uncertainty than a competition where the outcome is important but uncertain. So we get into doubt. And doubt is our mind's way of asking questions to try to keep us safe. What if I don't catch the ball? What if I don't make the most important goal? What if I don't do this? And my answer to athletes, and we have to do this well before game time. You have to train to be able to do this. So this is some of the mental training you would do well before a competition, is to learn to identify doubt early, welcome it rather than fight it, because doubt's going to happen. But answer the questions that doubt asks. What if I don't make the shot? I'll get up and I'm going to support my team and I'm going to be ready for the next time I do it. But what we'll do is we'll get hung up in the what ifs, and it becomes like this thought loop. What if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not good enough? If I'm not good enough, I'm going to be benched for first half of this game, and I'll come back next time and give it a better shot. You know what I mean? It's like kind of talking realistically rather than letting the doubt thought loop play out over and over again, which in and of itself is a real performance detractor.
So that's interesting, because I wouldn't have thought that you would want to engage with the doubt even in that sort of constructive way. Like there have been moments where I have been in flow, is the way people have described it, where like I just know what to do. Like I'm not even thinking. It's like not even me. It's just my body, is happening to me. And the passes are great. Like I had one game. So I'm an ultimate frisbee player.
Are
And I've
you?
never
So's
been
my daughter. That's awesome.
Oh, cool.
Well, that
I've
board's
never
fucked
been
up.
particularly good. I was good in high school when nobody played it.
Mm,
But and now I'm old and I'm playing on teams with, lots of young people.
mm,
A couple of years ago, we were playing a tour. My old men and I, when I was still in the U.S., were playing a tournament in Florida. And the first day we did very poorly, and I almost didn't play the second day because I'd kind of injured myself. I was wrapped. But I had, for 3 games, the most incredible day. I could not miss. I was catching things I
mm.
wouldn't be able to catch. I was playing defense. People were noticing, and even the noticing didn't like
Detract.
detract. And I've never played close to that well since, and I'd never played that well before. But it was a truly magical moment, and I can kind of go back to that in my mind as just unwrapping a present. But
Ah, that's
I
beautiful.
don't understand what it was about or how to get it again.
Well, certainly it comes up a lot in sports psychology, this idea of flow. Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi was the researcher who really kind of took deep dives into this. And he would really talk about, I mean, we know what the conditions of flow look like. So it's that real perfect balance between challenge and ability, so that you're challenged, but if it's not enough of a challenge, you're bored. If it's too much of a challenge, you're overwhelmed. And so for whatever reason for you that day, there was that match. But the thing about flow that I find equally interesting is that it is not something you can, like you've shown that. I'm sure you would want that to happen more often, and yet we don't really know how to promote flow. What we do teach athletes is the idea of what is it like when you play your best, and when you do those things, maybe flow will come to you, but it's not something you can search for or lust for or demand.
Mm,
And what I'll say to athletes is that and I know I've met them, Olympic champions. There are Olympic champions out there who have never experienced flow. So success is possible without it. But it's what
mm,
the problem with flow is that when you think, I have to have it in order to perform well. And as soon as you want it, it's like wanting when somebody wants to meet their perfect soulmate and go searching and realizing you kind of have to back off because you're looking desperate at dates. You can relax and be yourself. In a performance ways, it's really knowing what is it that I am capable of doing and just creating the conditions. So we walk, kind of think about what is it you eat, what's your routine, how are you approaching a competition, how are you thinking about it, putting those ingredients together and hoping flow will find you. Because
mm.
as you have seen, it found you that day. And what a beautiful thing. I mean, I was a softball pitcher, and I was young when I had some amazing flow experiences where I knew where the ball was going before it left my hand. I won games crazy, and then I got the yips in college, which
Oh.
led me to sports psychology because I stopped being able to control the ball. And I don't think it had to do with me lusting for flow, but I just lost some key ability in my pitching mechanics, and nobody could help me. Nobody knew about the yips back then, and I just thought I do never want an athlete to go through what I went through, and
Yeah.
that led me down this career path.
Can you define yips for folks who haven't heard the
Yeah,
term?
it's when it's an athlete suddenly becomes unable to perform a seemingly simple task in their sport. So, from my experience, I see it more in American baseball, where the catcher, who is the player behind the batter, suddenly loses the ability to just throw the ball back to the pitcher, which is a completely non-pressurized throw. And like it's awkward and it's awful. And of course, the pressure you put on yourself, the more you try to correct this thing. And honestly, I haven't researched it enough because I just kind of probably blocked that stuff off from my own career to know what we do now. I'm sure there's ways to help athletes with yips at this point, but I don't know if
Hmm.
you've had any experience in other sports where you've seen that or you've heard about it, but that's my understanding about it.
I think I've blocked out. I'm sure I've played a lot of sports. I'm sure I've had that experience where, yeah, it just becomes the ease of the movement itself becomes the issue.
Yeah.
Like it's this huge, heavy story of, well, what's wrong with me?
Mm. I mean, like in baseball again, because that's sort of I played softball. It would like the easiest play for a pitcher to make a defensive play is when the ball's hit straight to them and they just have the easy throw to first base. And it's that easy throw to first base that often throws people off because it's like it's easier when you have effort and you have to like I was much better at the balls that I had to reach way over for and then make the crazy
Yeah,
play than I
yeah.
was with the ones right in front of me. I don't think that's the yips. Yips is a repeated inability to
Mm,
do something. Anyway,
okay. Yeah. Well, in ultimate, we have something called conservation of greatness, which
mm.
is after you make an amazing catch, you then make a shitty throw.
There's so much psychology there, right? Because there's, especially, I mean, again, my daughter plays it and I see layout catches that are just insane. And, you know, the adrenaline that takes to get up and then the ability to have the presence of mind to immediately calm and go into the next
Mm.
execution of game. I don't know if you've ever seen the sport of biathlon. It's
Just
skiing and shooting.
okay.
So it's cross
No.
country skiing. And it's kind of a similar thing, I imagine. A lot of the work to help elite biathletes is the ability to get to stop skiing and where their heart rate is accelerating through the roof and to calm themselves so quickly because it's a timed thing. Like you have, I think it's 5 shots that you have to make at a given setting but and then you get up and ski again to settle and accurately shoot a rifle is one of those transitions that I think makes to me this conservation of greatness. Like
Mm.
if you have to have a strategy for what am I going to do to bring myself down to be able to have the presence of mind to really execute a great throw after that.
Mm.
Because I could so see how that would be hard.
Yeah, I never thought about it in terms of just pure physiology.
Mm.
It, it brings to mind another sport that I heard of, chess boxing. Which,
I've never heard of
which I-
chess boxing, but tell me more.
yeah, well, I think it's just what it sounds like. You have a round of boxing and then you sit down and you play chess for a few moves and
Oh,
then
okay.
so you just
Okay.
taking that mind body split to the extreme, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so
Okay.
it's similar where you're having to kind of divide up your cognitive load to do two extremely different things, which, you know, you could say triathlon's a little bit like that, where you have multi-sport events or modern pentathlon, which is even more, or decathlon, you know, where you're having to really kind of compartmentalize your energy.
Mm. So something that came up for me is this idea of decoupling from outcome is
Mm,
not the same as like not caring. Like I'm
mm,
thinking, I don't know if you saw The Last Dance with Michael Jordan,
mm,
the right, like there's this, I think that, I mean, I get the impression that there are people who are incredibly high performers who are basically assholes and miserable because they're so driven for the win that they won't settle for anything less. And
mm.
you're saying that, well, we want to decouple it. I can imagine telling Michael Jordan that and him laughing in your face, saying it's my pathological need to be the best that drives me to be the best. And if I decouple from outcome, what else would drive me?
And yet, using Jordan as an example, his story of greatness hinged on his ability to give up his own ego for the team in order to help the team win. So he might have, you know, and you could argue that was in the interest of his own, you know, to get the team to win. But I think we have to figure out ways to be most effective in the moment. And I think of Michael Jordan as a rare air is a great description of him because he's one of those people who could really embrace and thrive off the pressure of high performance situations. Not everybody's like that. And so it's also important to recognize people where they are. And I think you know, a championship team gets used to playing. in those situations, and it becomes the new normal for them. I was just reading a history of the Bulls actually using and how long the trajectory of NBA finals where they lost in the first round and then they got to they finally beat the Pistons and they lost again. And they really had to work into that space and make that the normal. For most athletes, but I won't say all because there's always exceptions to the rule. It can be that the messaging, particularly the messaging around imagined consequences if I don't make this shot, are what messes with the mechanics and makes the process of making that shot all the more difficult. I'll give you Michael Jordan. I'll give you the superstars in the game who just are able to put things together. But I think for most of the mortals out there, there is some use, particularly like your friend who discover that when the chips are on the when the chips are high, or what am I trying to say? When the stakes are high, is when if I notice a pattern of performance decrements when the stakes are high, I'm going to need to figure out a new way to approach high performance in those spaces. But if I'm winning, I'm not, they're not going to be talking to me. I never got a call from Michael Jordan my whole career. Trust me. Now, not to say that he didn't work. I know he worked with a meditation expert. Phil Jackson was like the most psychologically oriented coach on the planet. And I think Phil Jackson was the one that helped Michael Jordan really make that transition from individual ego to being part of a team.
On your website, you are a meditation teacher as well.
I am.
So what's the secret? What's the relationship?
Well, honestly, like I teach a secular form of meditation, and that it's not, you don't have to believe anything in particular. But even if you are doing the Buddhist tradition meditation, they always say, just try it. Try the practice. There's no dogma associated with meditation, so even though I'm not Buddhist, I'm becoming more Buddhist-like as I go. But it's one of the few ways that we know to train the mind. In that it's a practice, not a perfect. There's so many misconceptions about meditation that, I'm no good at it, so therefore I shouldn't do it. And it would be like saying I go to the gym and I'm not very fast on the treadmill, so I'm never going to do treadmill running again. Well, the idea of the gym is a gateway to fitness. So you start kind of crap and through perseverance at the practice, you develop the fitness to do the things you want to do in your life, whether it's sport or otherwise. Meditation is a practice that enhances concentration, helps you understand how the mind works. But the secret sauce, in my view, is it helps you cultivate an attitude of really openness to what life has to offer in that moment, rather than how you want it to be. The Buddhist term is equanimity. But it's getting back to this idea that and the more I've studied meditation, the more I think I bring to my role as a sports psychologist, because I can sit with equanimity with stuff I wouldn't have felt comfortable talking to athletes about 15 years ago. Nobody wanted to talk about life after the Olympics because it was going to jinx you, or nobody wanted to talk about what would happen if you lose. What happens if you don't win the gold medal? And yet, being able to be with that and sit quietly while somebody's like freaking out over, oh my God, I can't lose. Yes, you can. And let's talk about what would happen if you did. Helps, let's put down the burden of that expectation, because we don't know how the outcome's going to come out. I'm not saying win or lose, but I am here to say we want to be able to openly talk about all the possible outcomes, so none of them own you without you knowing it. And I see meditation as a practice that helps cultivate these qualities of mind that absolutely have changed my life. And I firmly believe and have seen evidence of them underpinning more sustained performance at somebody's highest level, because it brings an attitude. And it's hard. It's a concentration exercise. If meditation in 2 seconds, if I'm going to give a tutorial, you cultivate, or you come in with an intention to hold your attention on an anchor of some kind. Generally, it's the breath, but it could be sound. It could be the feel of your hands in space. And your job during the time that the timer is on, or if you're listening to a guided meditation, is to hold your attention to that thing, knowing that, of course, we're going to lose that a million times over 10 minutes. But it's not the losing that makes it a bad thing. It's the regaining of it that's, literally training, or, if you want to make a mind into a muscle analogy, which I'm not quite fond of for reasons I can get into. But this idea, I'm training an ability to bring my attention where I want it to be, when I want it to be there. And I would argue that attention, our ability to attend to what we want when we want to, is the currency of performance. Because in sport, it's about, what am I paying attention to? Is it what's happening to me right now? Or am I ruminating about the last mistake I made? Or am I anticipating the win that it's like a minute away, and yet when I'm thinking about that, somebody beats me to the finish line?
Mm.
In business, it's about the competition, or about the stock prices, rather than what is it that I need to do as a leader to bring my team to their, to talk to the team to the best of my ability to bring out their best performance.
Yeah. The way I think about it with people I work with is, it's like when if you have your GPS navigation system and suddenly you lose the satellite, and you've superimposed some old map, like you have now the map is dated,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As
Like
opposed to
you're not here.
here's what's in front of me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and so when I think about meditation, I don't know anything, we do, there's lots of ways we help athletes see things differently, but very few ways that other than physical practice, which teaches you a skill of attention, because you learn over and over again, keep your eye on the ball in baseball or whatever it is. We don't spend time helping people work on this capacity we all have as humans, that is the victim of an undeclared war, in the sense that, we look at our technology, the speed of information coming at us. Our attention is being eroded at a rate we've not seen before. And so those of us who can hold on and cultivate that in conditions of complexity or speed are going to have a tremendous performance advantage, in my view.
So, given that you just said you don't really like the mind as a muscle metaphor, I'm going to ask an obnoxious question before we get to why. I thought, like, if I'm an athlete and I'm doing training, if I'm sprinting or doing weights or something, somebody's figured out exactly what my minimum effective dose is and an optimal dose is. Is there a way to figure out your minimum effective dose or optimal dose of meditation? Because I try to do 20 minutes a day, but I feel like maybe it's too long, it's too short. Like, how do you think
Yeah,
about that?
I don't think it's not useful to think about it I love doing the equating of mind and body in many situations, but like the body, if you stay on a treadmill for 12 hours straight, you're going to hurt yourself. There is, people can meditate for amazing amounts of times, and as long as they're eating and getting some sleep, you can keep going. So it's not going to be an overtraining situation with meditation. There's always science that's looking at what is the minimum, effective dose. And the last research I've heard, and there may be updates to this, was from Dr. Amishi Jha, who works in defense. And so she did a lot of, study around what seemed to be the minimal dosage. And she came up with 16 minutes a day, a nice non-round figure. But I see it as a kind of a swimming pool thing. And I talk about there's shallow end practices that can just help you be more mindful. Like if we just don't worry about the neurological benefits or changing the way, enlightenment or anything else. But if you can be more attentive to the tasks of daily living, and know that occasionally I'm going to really pay attention to brushing my teeth, or notice the water hitting me in the shower, I'm learning to be more mindful. But then you go into actually meditation practice where it hones the ability sharper. I'll make no bones about it. It was in retreat of 8 days where I had my big breakthrough. But do you need to have a big breakthrough? I think you could develop skill even as little as a minute or two sprinkled through your day.
Hmm. Yeah.
Not an easy answer to another
Yeah.
question to answer it, succinctly, but
Well, often I find that I've asked the wrong question. It's very helpful to hear that like that question frames the thing in a way that actually, it's got assumptions baked in that I want to
No, but
unpack
I
and
love it
question.
because the way you ask it is the way most people ask it. So you're doing a service to anyone listening who might be wondering. People will say to me, "Oh, my mind, is too fast moving for meditation," as if only meditators have slow minds. It's coming to terms with we all have minds that have been eroded by what's happening to us in our lives, and the sheer for all the things I talked about earlier, and it's becoming cheerfully aware without judging, and still working on those skills where the magic happens, no matter pin
Hmm.
drop pieces or deeper moments where you can get more into it.
Yeah. So have you seen a difference in the minds of the athletes you work with from like 1996, or pre-smartphone, pre-internet and lately?
That's a real tough question. I mean, on a granular level, I could say there was, with the coming of social media when back in, the 90s, there was a lot of work to, take smartphones out of athletes' hands, during big competitions because it was such a novel distraction. I think it's only become more weaponized and more subtle. I've been out of elite sport now for a few years, so I think athletes are smarter about recognizing the impact of it, but at the same time, it's more insidious in its effect. So, it's an evolution. You can't really say a yes, no. I think the effects are always shifting for people. Um, I think there can be, there's so much on our phones now that can help us. If you're recorded using for recorded meditations that are helping you kind of prepare for performance, that's awesome. But when we use it as a way, all the negative things can still happen. So I'm not answering your question because I don't know there is an answer. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
yeah,
and where it comes from is thinking about myself, like you said, like, brushing your teeth mindfully. And there's always, like, brushing my teeth, there's always like something I could be reading on my phone, right? It almost
and
feels like, there's something else I could be doing.
and I guess what I'd watch out for you and anyone who's listening who tends to do this is what we're doing is we're splitting our attention and we think we're multitasking when in fact we're eroding our ability to attend. And there is, they talk about multitasking being our minds frantically, you don't feel the effort happening, but you're going to what you're reading, you're brushing your teeth, you're going to what you're reading, you're brushing your teeth. And there's what they call an intentional blink that happens each time you go from one to the other, where you're literally not doing anything. So your mind's having to work pretty hard to manage two things at once. And it's eroding your ability to be on one thing. Because, like you said, it's almost like we've decided that one thing isn't good enough. We got to do two. Who says?
Well, especially if the one thing is just a body thing, right? Like
Mm.
when you go to the gym and you see people on the treadmill, I never see anyone who's like, I'm being mindful about my stride and my breath. I see everyone watching renovation shows or listening to something or right.
Yeah,
It's like
and
the body needs a walk, but the mind would rather be doing more interesting things.
and I guess what I would say to that is there's nothing inherently wrong with you. Like if you want to get more out of it, your teeth are going to get brushed one way or the other, unless you find after a while that you're not doing it because you've actually stopped or something. Like it's always a wonder to me when we have stuff in the car, we get home, we don't know how we got home. Like how
Yeah.
many people are
Well,
driving heavy
it's an
machinery?
electric toothbrush, so it'll give me
Yeah.
the 2 minutes. I don't even have to think. I don't even have to pay attention to how long.
But I guess what I would be saying, looking at is a deeper issue about how, are we going through our entire lives never doing just one thing? And the load that it leaves on our minds. And one of the things that meditation does, but even just being meditative about, because the goal of meditation is not to become a great meditator. Who cares? The goal of meditation is to lead a more meditative life so that you are more able to be with the things that are important. And maybe you're great at being able to decouple from that phone when your kid comes running up or your wife asks you a question. But I run into a lot of people who find that their lust for doing more with each moment means they're not able to be fully there when they need to. And it is tiring. There's a cognitive load that we are unintentionally subjecting our minds to. And one of the things about meditative action or meditation itself is it's healing. It is actually doing the most challenging thing, which is just to be here with relatively little distraction. And it's often said it's simple, but it sure ain't easy. But it's cultivating a different quality of mind that we don't give ourselves the chance to live in very often. Like, am I fully aware that, like in sitting here with you talking about this, I'm more aware of us talking than I was when I'm just expounding on some idea that I have in my head. But I'm able to I'm sitting in a chair, I'm thinking about how grateful I am to have this conversation with you. And it makes me want to be here as fully as I can. But like, do we have that intention? Because we don't even think about it. We're thinking about the other things that we need to be doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, I think that's for me the cost of the 2 minutes of toothbrushing. It's not that, I didn't, fully experience the bristles or something. It's
right.
that now I'm on this interview I swear to God, I still get this. I have the impulse to hit control and go look at my inbox, right? This is a
Yeah.
fun conversation. I'm totally present, and yet I can feel it. I can feel the impulse.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, as like one of the problems of being high performing is that you have to do a lot of things that are hard, that there's always an easier thing to do than the thing that's meaningful.
Right.
And so
Interesting, yeah, or like compelling, or our phones are designed to grab us, and inboxes designed to grab us, and I'm as guilty of it as you, although I'm getting marginally better, at least of being aware of when it's happening. But you're right. Yeah. And if we don't, in my view, it's like when we're not aware of that, we just give into those impulses and wonder what happened to the last half hour.
yeah. And
Yeah.
those are more or less benign impulses. The kind of
Mm.
work that I do with people is a lot about bad habits,
Mm.
right? That are sabotaging their teams and their careers. And without the awareness, they don't notice the trigger, they don't notice the impulse, they just notice the action and the
Or the
aftermath.
action, yeah, the aftermath slaps them in the face and they don't even know what happened. Totally. I love it. Like, my keynote in this space is all about the awareness and our blind spots to, we think we're aware. They say, 85% of us think we are, but only 15% of us really are. So what's happening
Uh-huh.
here? And the idea that, like, if you're in a car, there's blind spots, right? Where's the blind spot when you're driving a car? I'm
Right.
asking. It's like over
So
each, despite your rear view mirror and side mirrors, there's a space that, unless you turn physically, or there's now, auxiliary cameras and more modern cars that allow you to see it. That's the blind spot about, right? So you can hack those blind spots. But like you're saying, it's the blind spots that we don't know about that own us. And my job is, through practices like this, um, and there are other ways to deal with it, because you need to get feedback from other people about what your blind spots are often, because they can see it even if you can't, to help people become more effective. Absolutely. I think you're onto
yeah,
something.
yeah, almost, by definition, if it's a blind spot, you can't see it. And because they're so bespoke, it's not like every car, there's one. Like,
Yeah.
what am I,
What are
right? And
mine? And mhm. Go ahead.
yeah, I think maybe this will bring us to the concept of what I wanted to introduce earlier about sort of individual versus team.
Mm.
That right, that how we orient ourselves towards that information will determine how fast and how well we learn, and how comfortable other people feel about approaching us with gifts of you
Insight
know
or feedback, or
insight.
yeah, totally.
So how do you help when you're working with teams? Because I think performance is, at least in the U.S. culture, where we grew up, it's a very sort of individually based thing. And teams, like a team that works together almost feels like something magical that we don't understand. How do you help people balance that individual striving versus the team versus, like Michael Jordan, pulling back a little bit, or
That particular question about team functioning, I think, has to start at the top about sort of the performance culture that any particular team wants. And I don't know if you're familiar with the New Zealand All Blacks, the perennially successful rugby team.
I know them from the movie Invictus, where they lost to the South Africans in '95. So,
Um, well,
and,
they
and
had,
the Haka.
yes, okay, fair enough. And that's more of a broader New Zealand tradition, but you do see it with the All Blacks. They had a well publicized set of team culture strictures, one of which is don't be a dickhead. And so great teams, I think, bring to consciousness the kind of qualities they want the team to exhibit, and it's enforced from the top down, so that like great teams, what they do is they have a specific culture, and you know what it is by how people behave. It's not just words. Don't be a dickhead wouldn't mean anything except that it became something that players held each other accountable to and was enforced from the top down. So when you talk about the needs of the individual versus the rest of the players, the fastest way to undermine a culture on a otherwise high performing team is to put up with dickhead behavior, particularly on the basis nobody would put up with it if somebody's a poor player, but it's the star
Hmm.
player who isn't able to meet the needs of the team that can cripple a team no matter what their star power is. So, using Michael Jordan as an example, I don't think he was ever a dickhead, but what he was doing was trying to do everything himself, which meant that disempowered everybody else on the team, inadvertently making his job 1,000 times harder and not getting the team anywhere. But what we see too, you see it in organizations, and you see it in teams, in sport teams where management is afraid to hold, the star player accountable, and yet doing the right thing by the rest of the team to make sure everybody's playing well together is something that is sacrosanct if you really want a high performing team. Does that make sense? Like where people feel protected, that no one else is getting away with things that are undermining the team. But that is not the same thing as saying that you coach everybody the same way. You may give more time to your better players because they deserve it. It's not about being completely equal. So they're talking about this from a coaching perspective. But there's, I think, then another piece, and this is such an incomplete speaking of this phenomena, because you could say a million things about building a great team. But it's also developing that culture of psychological safety that is very counterintuitive in sport, and I think counterintuitive in a lot of high achieving domains, frankly. This idea of making it safe enough for people to say what they really think, and they're bringing their best selves into the team. But that can only happen if management and the best players and the coach are also willing to be vulnerable to be able to speak into that space. What I see happening is coaches or administrators, like psychological safety. You have to tell me what's going wrong, and they bite their head off when they do. And it's like, that's not safe. But when we can
Mm.
create that environment where everybody feels like we're all in this together, we're trying to be great, we're holding each other accountable to our best performances. Because what happens in sport, I was working with the U.S. rugby team captain, by far one of the most emotionally intelligent athletes I've ever run into. And if he doesn't become president, I will be shocked. Such a great leader. But when we were talking about this idea of safety, he's like, KP, we got this young team. If we just everybody feels safe, where does that get us? They have to rise up. They have to be better. And I was like, it's safety and accountability. You don't just have safety without accountability. You also have exquisite accountability to hold everybody to the highest standard possible in a safe way. So it's not one or the other. You see too many times of scorched earth accountability. The coach who is, and I've worked with teams like this, coaches who would say to me, KP, I break them, you fix them. Accountability up the wazoo. You get dragged off the field if you don't play well. I'm going to yell at you. There's no safety there. People are just like afraid, and trying to perform well. But when we can have both in balance, that's where the magic starts to happen. And now I make it sound easy. 2 things, right? Bam. Clearly, there's a big soup here that we're only speaking of a couple of ingredients.
Yeah, well, and the idea of psychological safety in an environment where performance has consequences, right? Where you could get kicked off the team, right? You don't make the squad, right? I was just reading about Caitlin Clark not making the women's Olympic basketball team. So that's getting back to your earlier point of like what happens after, like all of our high performance is a goal, but maybe it's not the goal. That there's bigger. I wonder if there's ever been a study of like Olympians who are gold, silver, bronze, and fourth, and then see who has happier lives. Would there be any correlation? Would it be completely random? Like there's ways of saying like you're not going to make it here, but it's not the same as being gored by a wild boar and eaten by carrion.
Yeah. No, so many of our threats today are existential. Like no one dies if they don't make something. And I don't know that there's a study to that, but I think we're getting a lot better than we were back when I started in sports psychology with acknowledging the lifespan of sport and talking more to these issues. Like we're talking about transition out of sport before people have to do it, which is really healthy in a way that it was really taboo. I was not allowed to talk to athletes about what was going to happen after the games because it was considered bad luck. And when you're not talking about those outcomes and you're not preparing people, like one of the most electrifying experiences I had in a group, I know we're going over, is that okay?
Oh, fine with me. I'm having fun. I haven't checked my email in over an hour and 3 minutes. I'm liberated.
I know, but I love that the
I might even be enlightened.
Well, so I'm sitting in a group of athletes. The USOC used to bring together like the kind of top Olympic hopefuls, and we would do team building across sports. And we would have Olympic mentors, medalists come in to talk about what are the pitfalls and what they did. It was a really cool mentoring experience and team building, so that we were encouraging one team, one dream kind of idea across the whole Olympic team. And we had an athlete named Dan O'Brien. I don't know if he's a track and field athlete who famously or infamously was part of an advertising campaign. God, I'm going to mess the years up. I want to say for the 1992 Olympics, perhaps, but it could be, I think that's right, but don't quote me. Say it's an Olympics. And Dan and Dave were 2 decathletes and heads and shoulders.
I remember this.
Okay.
They were like talking to each other and competing.
It was a Reebok commercial that ran the whole summer before the Olympic trials. And Dan O'Brien famously no-heighted in that high jump for the Olympic selections that year, despite being a favorite. The question was which one of these 2 were going to win the gold medal at the Olympics. He doesn't even make the team. And it was, it's sort of some hubris around waiting for the height to get high enough to challenge him. And then all of a sudden he misses 3 in a row. And so he's in front of this group. He's an amazing speaker. So what ended up happening is he's obviously devastated. I didn't know him personally, but presuming he was. And, Dave, I can't even think of Dave's last name now, goes on to the Olympics. Don't know how he did. But Dan comes back for let's say it's the 96 Olympics, might have been the 2004 Olympics, quote me. And it was in Atlanta. Yes, so it was the 96 Olympics. Home crowd. And he's working with a sports psychologist to and media training, because he's going to be the topic at any given, particularly the Olympic selections. Gets through that, makes the team, wins the Olympic gold medal. There was not a story of retribution bigger than Dan O'Brien's story in 1996. The whole stadium stayed for the award ceremony just to see him get that gold medal around his neck. Because it happens
Hmm.
after all the competitions are over. And he's telling this story to this group of athletes. And he said, it was awesome until the next day when I couldn't get out of bed. And I spent the next year on the couch. Kind of classic,
Hmm.
what we've been talking about, this idea of what do you do when you've been your whole, 4-year dream. Now what? And what was interesting wasn't just so much the story itself and how it transfixed athletes to hear this vulnerability coming from this celebrated Olympic gold medalist. But I picked out one guy in the crowd who was really, really tracking him. And this is a guy named Brandon Slay, who was a wrestler, freestyle wrestler. And so this event took place, probably 2008. So well after Dan's time at the Olympics in 96. Brandon Slay won the Olympic gold medal in freestyle wrestling at the Athens Olympics in 2004. And it fell into it because the eventual gold medalist was done on drug charges. But he won. He was this top man standing, won. And I never really heard about what happened to Brandon Slay. I did know he was one of the mentors. He wasn't even one of the athletes receiving this information. He was another mentor, just like Dan O'Brien. And they start having this conversation. And it was like nobody else, there's 150 people in the room. And Brandon Slay was just like, so what'd you do? And what'd you deal with this? And they were having this, post-gold medalist discussion. And all I knew about Brandon Slay at that moment was that he was a property developer in Texas. And we brought him in, and he's a great guy. But there was something, the hair on the back of my neck was going up watching these two talk, because you realize that Brandon Slay had never had a chance to unpack his own Olympic gold medal experience with somebody who had been there before. And in the process of that conversation, Brandon talked to me later about how it changed his life, because what he was doing was a job he didn't like. He was holding his then girlfriend at arm's length, refusing to commit to her. He leaves the summit. He proposes to his girlfriend. He quits his job in Texas to take the head coach of the USA freestyle team in Colorado Springs, because he was like, the biggest thing I can do right now is get back to this sport. But he found himself in the course of this conversation with this other gold medalist talking in the rare air of something that he had never, it was amazing just how it changed his life. It was a moment you weren't
Well,
expecting.
yeah, it's giving me some chills because one of the groups that I work with is like successful entrepreneurs who've sold their business. It's the day after they win the gold medal, right? They've been working, they've sacrificed friends, family, sometimes health. They've got this thing, and they've just got a windfall of 10 million, 100 million, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
Now
they
what?
feel the same way, like lost, depressed. They don't know who they are. And who can they talk to? Right? Who's going to be like, oh, I
I
feel,
really understand. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
empathize with your plight. Maybe
Right.
buy another boat. You'll feel better. Right?
Yeah.
And yet, one of the reasons I'm attracted to these folks is, the world needs high performance, but high performance that's tied to something more than individual ego and reward. It needs high performance from all of us to fix the messes we're in. And these are people who have proven themselves to be highly capable. As an entrepreneur, you can't just be a solo. You have to build your team. They are movers and shakers, and they have been conditioned in a very limited way.
Yeah. No, and you think about what made both of these two athletes sing was giving back. Dan O'Brien continues, as far as I know, to be an amazing motivational speaker, and Brandon Slay refashioned his life to give back to the sport. He was meant to do this. It was amazing. So there is something to be said here. And again, it goes back to the thing we started with. It's not about the outcome. It's about the process. And, we had a saying at the Olympic Committee that it's the Olympics. It's not every 4 years. It's every day. And it's like, how am I living my life? And, and it is about preparing. If it's not about the money, what is it about? And how am I going to leverage this windfall thing that happened to me for the greater good that's going to give back to me? Because, if it's just this, yeah, no wonder people feel empty.
Hmm.
I can see so much application across into your world for this.
Yeah. So before we go, I want folks to know how they can get in touch with you and kind of a little bit about who you work with. So if someone's listening to this and you can help them, I want something to go click so they reach out to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. So I've it really is about taking these lessons around high performance that I've learned in sport, and this how helping leaders, helping teams with the very things we're talking about, bouncing back and forth, um, to better cope with the demands of the fast-paced and chaotic worlds that we're in, become more aware, less hijacked by the things that we're not aware of, and really debunk the myth for high achievers that it has to be about hard effort to get where we need to go, that there are actually ways. I teach psychological flexibility and adaptability rather than mental toughness. The only things I'll say about mental toughness is that I never use the words mental and toughness in the same sentence, click together in a sentence together. So it's helping individuals and teams work together in ways that get them where they want to go in a way that's easier through specific training and mental skills.
Hmm.
So, and my company name is Dr. Kirsten Peterson. It's DrKirsten, Peterson with an O. You can find me online, website, and through LinkedIn.
Okay, and
With
the
that
doctor
on.
there is DR, right?
Correct. Just like on your screen here, Dr. Howie Jacobson. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Matt Church told me to add it, so
I I was spanked into doing it myself by the very same man. Not
yeah.
my favorite way of referring to myself, but we've earned it, so might as well do it.
As long as nobody, comes to me with a broken arm.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. I was three-quarters of the way rebranding myself as Kirsten Peterson, PhD, for that very reason. But I was told by many people that, yeah, doctor conveys the kind of gravitas that I think we both earned, and we might as well use it.
Right on, right on. And it's one less letter, so it's taking up less server farm.
That's
We're,
right.
we're carbon friendly.
Ah,
So,
beautiful.
Kirsten Peterson, this was such a fun conversation.
Mm.
I feel like we scratched the surface. I'll give you time to think about it. If you feel like you had a good time and you want to come back, I think there's a lot more
Uh,
that we can discuss.
I It feels right to me. I really enjoyed the chat today, and be happy to come back when and if you're ready.
Awesome. So it's Dr. Kirsten, Kirsten, Peterson with an O.com. And you have a book too. Maybe mention the book so that people can, if that string of letters is too complicated, they can find you through an online bookstore.
That's right. Well, my title isn't short either. It's When Grit Is Not Enough. So it's a treatise on this idea that sometimes the grind is not the way to go, even though we've often been culturally conditioned to believe that working harder is the way to achieve success. There are different ways to go about doing it, and that's what the book's about. So yes, you can find me where fine books are sold, Amazon, and here in Australia, Booktopia.
Nice, awesome. Yeah, I love that, and that's kind of the it's become. I did a sort of a 360, a 180 around that, around really training sort of grit and mental toughness, and then learning a bunch of stuff and having my own sort of breakdown and seeing other
Mm,
people that I've worked with on grit, kind of, it looked like we were flying, but then we were actually falling and hit the bottom
oh,
of the canyon and realize like it's fun to climb mountains, but there are some mountains that don't exist, so you don't need to try to climb them.
well, or you fight things harder than they need to be fought. I talk about like the workout. Every athlete has a workout they hate, It's sprints for one athlete, it's weights for another. And as soon as, so this idea of gritting through a workout we hate. Well, first of all, the workout doesn't hate you. It's a decision you're making about the workout that makes it harder to get into it. And so how do we back off from this word hate and approach whatever the workout is on its own terms and just give the effort you need for that without giving an iota more? To sustain effort over time, we often dump jet fuel unnecessarily around this, the stories we tell or how much we don't like doing something, when in fact it's just the thing we have to do. Anyway, I could go on, but that's another
Right. All
story
right.
for another
So
day.
excellent. Dr. Kirsten Peterson, thank you so much for your wisdom, for sharing it, and for taking the time today.
My pleasure, Howie. It's been great chatting with you.
And that's a wrap. Find the show notes for today's episode at plantyourself.com/591. So what's been going on? I've been taking the week off after the tournament now 2 weekends ago in Lerma. This past weekend, I did not go to Ultimate. I just relaxed. I stayed in bed as much as possible. And the more I rested and slept and relaxed, the more my body wanted. So this morning was the first time I'd been active in a while. Went down to the beach to do a workout with Jay, my trainer. We added a new thing. We added strengthening shoulders with bands, sort of lifting up to the front and then laterally. So I'm hoping this is going to help my mid and upper back in the same way that all those squats and walking lunges have really improved my knees. Getting hot here. It's been a cool June and July for this part of the world, but it's supposed to become a scorcher now for the next 5 or 6 weeks, so bracing for that. Workouts have been moving from 9:30 to 8:30 to 8 to this morning 7:30. Next week we're going for 6:30, and hopefully I can get it in before the heat becomes unbearable. Also, apparently they are dredging more sand onto the beach where I worked out last summer, but the beach has pretty much disappeared due to a storm in the fall. And now they're trying to rebuild it so they can pack more tourists, get the restaurant back up, porta potties, and restore things to the way they were when we first arrived. So that's about it. Have as always, a good week and be well, my friends.